So, before we tell you about the 7-year itch part of this relationship, I think that we'd better tell you about the rock it was built on. Because certainly I wasn't looking for a husband back in 1987, 36 years ago. I had a great life. I was making good money. I had the most amazing apartment in Beechwood Canyon. And I had lots of friends. My career was going great, and I was thinking, if I was ever going to marry someone, they would have to truly add something to my life because everything felt incredibly complete.
Yeah, and I was a single dad with 3 kids running a theater company, so I had no time or space for a relationship. And plus, I've been married 3 times before already, and that didn't work out so well. So I certainly didn't need to do that again.
Yeah, and I get that because I was married before too, and I wasn't going to do that again.
But then this buddy of mine, Jed Mills, invited me to the first meeting of a filmmaking workshop he was starting.
Yeah, and Jed invited me there too because he wanted me to be part of the group, but he also had this thing for me, Jed did.
And after the meeting, I asked Jed about this beautiful woman who'd been sitting silent on the floor through the whole meeting.
Yeah, well, that's because I wasn't impressed with any of it or with them.
And Jed said, that's Laurie O'Brien. She's the one who played Mary Barnes at the Odyssey recently. And I said, no, I'm talking about the good-looking woman that was sitting on the floor, the redhead, because it couldn't have been the same person. I'd seen this play, and not only was it the most phenomenal piece of acting I'd ever seen in my life to this day, she would have had to be a shape changer. There was no resemblance between that person. Anyway, Jed wouldn't introduce me. He didn't want to introduce me. I think he had a thing for her.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
And so for 5 years, every time I see a woman with red hair and interesting mouth, I look, no, it's not her. And 5 years go by, and then 5 years later, on July 23rd, 1987, my friend
Beth Ruscio
back there. My friend Beth Ruscio calls me up and said, Carl, if you're going to come see this play I'm doing, you got to come this weekend.
Yeah, because we were closing that weekend. Our leading male actor had to go shoot a pilot.
So I called Daryl up and told him I was going to go see the play, and Daryl said, they'd keep the play going if they could find somebody to replace the guy who's leaving. And he said, the part's written for you. So I go to see this. I go to see Beth, and I go to see this role. And the first person that walks on stage is Laurie O'Brien.
Playing the ugly girl again and cussing like a sailor. And it was savage in John Patrick Shanley's Savage in Limbo.
And again, she was brilliant. And after the play, I go up to her.
And in this deep, husky, incredibly beautiful voice that he has, he says, "Hi, I'm Carl Weintraub, and I just wanted you to know that I've been a very big fan of yours for a long time." And then he walks off, and I think, now, why can't I be with a guy like that?
So we all go to Nicodell's after for drinks.
And I didn't have any... I didn't have any cash on me, maybe. And maybe I was trying to make a connection or something, but I asked him to buy me a beer and some French fries.
And I was pretty impressed that she drank beer instead of wine.
And we talk, and we talk, and we talk, and we talk, and he tells me all about his life and his family and his crazy dad, which gives me pause. But what really impresses me is the way he talks about his family, his kids. And so I go home and I start writing about him in my journal.
So Beth gave me the script that night, and I took it home and I memorized it from beginning to end that night. Called up the director the next day, said, "I'll come in, I'll start at the beginning, you tell me when to stop. If you like what I do, I can go on next week."
And the next thing I know, we're back in rehearsal, and there's Carl. all puppy-eyed and staring at me and constantly, which is kind of unsettling because in the play, we are supposed to have zero chemistry between us.
But you got to understand, after 3 failed marriages, I knew that I wasn't good at that marriage. I would be better at courtly love, worshiping somebody from afar. So every night after the play, I'd go home and I'd write letters to her or write that I was never going to send her, or write in my journal about her.
And then there was this one afternoon after matinee when the whole cast was out to lunch together.
And we all got to talking about kids for some reason.
Yeah, and I was saying that I probably wasn't ever going to have kids because I divorced my husband in Denver, and my fertility was in question because I had an ovary removed years earlier, and I was content. I really was content with my life, but I admitted that I was actually pretty sad that I wasn't going to have kids because I always, from the time I was really little, I always fantasized about having a whole bunch of kids. And then Carl leans into me and so very softly whispers, "I'd have a child with you."
Why would I say that? I had 3 kids already from 2 different women, and courtly love. Remember?
Yeah, and I knew all that. But the way he said it, it seemed almost like it was inevitable, and it struck me as like, well, yeah, of course, this is what's supposed to happen now.
Well, the play was at the Cass Theater in Hollywood, and that's where Laurie lived. I lived out in Venice. And this one night after the play, there was going to be this happening at the Powerhouse Theater in Venice that we both wanted to go to. And I told her that she didn't like to drive that much. I told her that I would take her there and I would drive her back to Hollywood afterwards.
Yeah, and Venice was Carl's stomping ground, and everybody there knows him. And when we walk in, they're all so happy to see Carl, right? Because Carl brings out the best in people. And I believe that you can tell a person's character by the friends they have. And these people are so cool, and they just love him. And I just kind of fell in love with him just a little bit more.
So I drive her back home, and it's late, but we're not ready to be apart from each other yet. And the only place that was still open was the Denny's in Gower Gulch. And so we went in there and talked until 5 o'clock in the morning, talked about everything.
Yeah, and we discovered that we see the world, both the concrete one and the spiritual world around it, in the same way. The way it functions, the purpose of things, life, morals, ethics.
And that's when we knew.
Because he was the guy. He could offer me the things that would make my life better.
And I could hardly believe that this fascinating woman matched up perfectly with the way I understood the universe.
And so we got married a year to the day from the evening Carl came to see the play.
Because you can't have 2 anniversaries, right? And it was a done deal that night I came to see the play.
Okay, and the story of Carl's proposal and the wedding on a cliff over the ocean in Big Sur.
And the way Laurie said, "You betcha," instead of "I do."
That's a whole other story that we'll tell you at another time. Yeah, but because
right now we've got to skip to 7 years later.
When we've got a 6-year-old kid.
And I'm working my ass off and not making much money.
And I'm starting to understand why his other wives left him.
Because I'm pretty much the same guy, the other wives left.
Right. And he is big, and he's messy, and he takes up a lot of space in all dimensions, especially when he was depressed, which happened a lot. He was always moving from crisis to crisis, but worst of all, he just doesn't listen. He gets this look. He often just zones out when I'm starting to talk. And he forgets to do things I ask him to do, claiming that he never heard me say them. And the truth is that he was just gone a lot. Emotionally, physically, in all areas. And my life, it just wasn't feeling all that much better anymore.
And she was on my case all the time. I mean, I couldn't do anything right. It was like, I felt like I was ruining her life.
Okay, so we finally decided that we're going to go to couples therapy.
So we'd been going for a few weeks. We didn't really like the therapist that much. He's kind of a dweeb, and we weren't really getting any place.
No, and then one session, the therapist has us sit down in chairs across from each other, and we're supposed to tell each other about our feelings, one at a time, and the other person's just supposed to sit and listen.
So I go first, and I talk for about 20 minutes. I had a lot to say. And
I heard him.
And I finish, and the therapist says, "Is that it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, Laurie, your turn."
So I take a deep breath, and I start to talk, and Carl falls instantly asleep. Yeah. Just like that. Head hanging, mouth open, chin on his chest, legs sprawled apart, asleep. I mean, asleep. Just gone, like he often is. The doctor and I sit there for a while looking at him, and the doctor says, "Does this happen a lot?" And I say, "Yeah, it does." And I'm thinking, okay, this is my chance. No one, none of my friends, none of his friends, no family would ever blame me if I chose to leave him right now. He fell asleep in therapy when it was my turn to talk about my feelings, for God's sake. But then I kept looking at him. And I think about that night at Denny's, what it is that I know about this man's heart and his intentions. He's not a mean man, nor is he indifferent. He's simply a diligent, hardworking man who always does his best and is exceedingly tired and challenged by the crises that are not of his making, mostly. I knew if I could love him right now, that we didn't need therapy.
So she woke me up and told me we were leaving, and we never went back.
Now, he's still big and messy, and he still doesn't listen very well. But if there's ever a time when I really need him to, I just have to say, "Okay, Carl, I'm going to talk about my feelings now. Try not to fall asleep."
Yeah.